The gunshot rang out over the dusty plains of Colorado Territory, 1873, as Thornton Pierce stood on the wooden platform with his Winchester rifle pointed skyward. The mail-order bride was arriving today, and he wasn't about to let anyone forget it, especially not the groom. "Get your lazy hide down here, Knox," Thornton bellowed toward the dilapidated cabin where Knox Blackwell had holed himself up since dawn. "Train's due in 20 minutes, and you look like something the coyotes dragged through hell." Knox Blackwell, 32 years of age and weathered beyond his years, glared at his reflection in the cracked mirror. His dark hair hung too long around his face, and the stubble on his jaw had nearly become a beard. This wasn't how he'd planned to meet his bride, but then again, none of this had been planned at all. "I'm coming," he growled, splashing water on his face from the basin. The cold shock did little to ease the tension in his shoulders or the knot in his stomach. What kind of woman agreed to marry a stranger in a backwater town like Timber Creek? What kind of desperate situation had driven her to accept his hastily written proposal? The answer was obvious: the same kind of desperation that had driven him to send for her in the first place. A man couldn't run a cattle ranch alone, not with winter coming and the Rawlins gang threatening to move in on his land. He needed a wife. The advertisement had promised a sturdy, hard-working woman seeking a husband in the West. He'd sent the money, made the arrangements, and now Tabitha Greene was arriving from Boston to become Mrs. Knox Blackwell. The town of Timber Creek was little more than a main street with a handful of businesses: the general store, the saloon, the sheriff's office, a small church, and the train depot. As Knox rode beside Thornton's wagon toward town, he could feel eyes watching from every window. "You're the talk of the town," Thornton said, grinning beneath his bushy mustache. "First wedding we've had in nearly 2 years. If she even stays," Knox muttered. "She ain't seen the place yet." "Well, you'd best hope she's as desperate as you are," Thornton replied, not unkindly. "Word is, she was passed over by 3 other potential husbands before your letter arrived." Knox's head snapped toward his friend. "What? You never told me that," Thornton shrugged. "Figured you knew. Why else would a Boston lady agree to marry a ornery rancher she's never met? She sent her photograph to 6 men from Denver to Dallas. 3 wrote back to decline." "Why?" Knox demanded, though his pride stung at asking. "Don't rightly know. Josephine at the general store heard from her cousin in Denver that the ladies got some kind of peculiarity. Nothing dangerous, mind you, just not what most men are looking for in these parts." Knox felt his jaw tighten. "I ain't most men." "No," Thornton agreed, looking at Knox's scarred hands and the faded burn mark that ran up his left forearm. "You surely ain't." The train whistle cut through the air as they approached the station. A small crowd had gathered. It wasn't every day a new face arrived in Timber Creek, especially not a bride. Knox dismounted, brushing dust from his cleanest shirt and straightening the battered hat on his head. His palms were sweating despite the cool autumn air. The locomotive rumbled into the station, steam billowing around the platform as it came to a screeching halt. Knox stood rigidly, watching as passengers began to disembark. A businessman in a fine suit, a young couple with a small child. An elderly man helped down by the conductor, and then she appeared. Tabitha Greene stood in the doorway of the passenger car, one gloved hand holding the rail as she surveyed the platform. She was taller than any woman Knox had ever seen up close. Her figure was slight beneath a traveling dress of faded blue, and her face was partially obscured by a modest hat. What struck Knox immediately was her posture: ramrod straight, chin lifted, shoulders squared as though she expected a fight. As she descended the steps, the whispers began. Knox could see why she had been rejected by other suitors. There was nothing conventionally pretty about Tabitha Greene. Her features were too sharp, her frame too angular, her height too imposing for a woman. Her auburn hair was pulled back severely, and when she removed her gloves, Knox could see that her hands were marked with what appeared to be ink stains. But it was her eyes that truly set her apart: large, intelligent, and startlingly defiant. She scanned the crowd until her gaze landed on Knox. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the platform, each taking the measure of the other. Then, clutching her small valise, she walked directly toward him. "Mr. Blackwell, I presume?" Her voice was unexpectedly soft, with the refined accent of the East. Knox removed his hat. Yes, madam, Knox Blackwell, you must be Miss Greene. I am. She extended her hand, not for him to kiss as a lady might, but to shake as a man would. I believe we have an arrangement. Knox took her hand, noting the firmness of her grip. We do. My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. I've arranged for the preacher to meet us tomorrow, if that suits you. Her eyes widened slightly. Tomorrow, so soon? Unless you need more time, he said quickly. To consider, Tabitha's lips pressed into a thin line. I've had quite enough time to consider, Mr. Blackwell. Tomorrow will be fine. I should like to freshen up before meeting the town, if possible. Knox nodded, acutely aware of the stares they were attracting. Thornton here will take your trunk. I've got my horse. Tabitha glanced at the large chestnut gelding tethered nearby. I'm perfectly capable of riding, Mr. Blackwell, if you'll permit me. This declaration caused another ripple of whispers among the onlookers. Women in Timber Creek Road, of course, but usually side saddle and certainly not in traveling clothes fresh off the train. Knox found himself nodding before he'd fully considered it. As you wish, Miss Greene. Within minutes, Tabitha had changed into riding clothes she produced from her valise, shocking several of the local women with her practical split skirt. She mounted the horse with practiced ease, settling herself in the saddle with the confidence of someone who had spent considerable time on horseback. As they rode out of town, Knox couldn't help but notice how straight she sat, how naturally she handled the reins. Whatever peculiarity had caused other men to reject her, it wasn't a lack of capability. I should tell you, she said as they cleared the edge of town, that I'm not what most men expect in a wife. Knox glanced at her. I gathered that. I'm educated. I read extensively. I have opinions on matters most consider beyond a woman's concern. I speak my mind. I've been told these are unattractive qualities. Knox considered this. Ranch life is hard, Miss Greene. I need someone who can think for themselves and speak up when necessary. Can you cook? She looked surprised at the abrupt question. Yes, can you sew adequately? Are you afraid of hard work? Her chin lifted higher. I am not, Knox nodded. Then we'll get along fine. They rode in silence for a while, the vast landscape of the Colorado Territory spreading around them, golden plains giving way to scattered pines as they approached the foothills. Knox's ranch sat in a small valley, sheltered from the worst of the winter winds by a ridge to the north. As they crested the final hill, Knox felt a surge of pride mixed with apprehension. The ranch wasn't much a main house of logs and stone, a barn, a corral, and a bunkhouse for the 2 hands he employed during calving season. The roof of the main house needed repair and the front porch sagged slightly on one side. But the land was good, the water reliable, and the herd healthy if small. This is it, he said, reining in his horse. Blackwell Ranch. Tabitha stopped beside him, her eyes taking in every detail. Knox watched her face, waiting for the disappointment, the regret that would surely come. Instead, she took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. It's beautiful, she said quietly. Knox blinked in surprise. It needs work. Yes, she agreed, but there's potential here. Good bones, as my father would say. She turned to him, the afternoon sun highlighting the copper strands in her auburn hair. I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Blackwell. I came west because I believe in building something worthwhile. For the first time since her arrival, Knox felt the knot in his stomach begin to loosen. Well then, Miss Greene, welcome home. The house was simple but solid, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. Knox had spent the previous week cleaning, but as Tabitha stepped inside, he suddenly saw the place through her eyes, the sparse furnishings, the utilitarian nature of everything, the complete lack of feminine touches. I know it's not what you're used to, he began. You don't know what I'm used to, Mr. Blackwell, she interrupted gently. She set down her valise and removed her hat, revealing the full glory of her auburn hair twisted into a practical knot at the nape of her neck. My father was a professor with more books than sense. We lived modestly. This is certainly different, but not unpleasantly so. She moved to the fireplace, running her fingers along the rough-hewn mantel. You built this yourself, Knox nodded. Most of it had help with the roof and the stone work. It's well crafted. She turned to face him. I should like to know more about the man I'm to marry tomorrow. Your letter was concise. Knox shifted uncomfortably. Letter writing had never been his strong suit. Not much to tell. My parents came west when I was a boy. Father died in '65 from a fever. Mother followed 2 years later. I worked cattle drives until I saved enough to buy this place 3 years ago. No siblings. A brother. He's up in Montana Territory, mining camp. Tabitha nodded, absorbing this information. And why did you send for a bride, Mr. Blackwell? Surely there are unmarried women in the territory. The directness of her question caught him off guard. None that would have me, he admitted gruffly. And none I would have. I need a partner, Miss Greene, not a delicate flower that wilts at the first sign of trouble. And you believed a city woman from Boston would be hardier than the local girls. There was a hint of amusement in her voice. I believed a woman desperate enough to travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger might be willing to work as hard as I do to make something of this place. His blunt words hung in the air between them. Tabitha's expression cooled, but she didn't flinch. I see. Well, you're not wrong about the desperation, though perhaps not in the way you imagine. She moved to the window, looking out at the land. I'm 26 years old, Mr. Blackwell. In Boston, that makes me firmly on the shelf. Add to that my height, my education, and what my aunt calls my unfortunate tendency to speak on matters beyond my ken, and you have a woman with few prospects. She turned back to him, her gaze direct. I came west not merely to find a husband, but to find purpose, to build something meaningful. If that aligns with your needs, then I believe our arrangement can be successful. Knox found himself nodding. Fair enough. Now, she said, practical once more, I would like to see the rest of the property before nightfall, and then perhaps you could explain the daily routine so I might begin to make myself useful. They spent the remainder of the afternoon touring the ranch. Knox showed her the barn, the smokehouse, the chicken coop, currently empty, and the small vegetable garden that had yielded poorly that year. Tabitha asked thoughtful questions about water sources, winter preparations, and the cattle operation. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple. Knox prepared a simple supper while Tabitha unpacked her few belongings in what would become their shared bedroom after tomorrow. The thought made his neck warm with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. They ate in relative silence, both seemingly lost in thought about the commitment they were about to make. I'll sleep in the bunkhouse tonight, Knox said as they finished the meal. Give you some privacy. Tabitha looked up, surprised. That's not necessary. I can take the second bedroom. No, it's better this way, more proper. He stood, clearing their plates. The preacher will be here at noon. Thornton and his wife will come as witnesses. Very well. Tabitha rose, smoothing her skirt. Good night, Mr. Blackwell. Knox, he corrected. If we're to be married tomorrow, you might as well use my given name. A small smile touched her lips. Good night, Knox. You may call me Tabitha. Good night, Tabitha. He tipped his hat and left, the night air cool against his face as he walked to the bunkhouse, wondering what he had gotten himself into. Morning came with a clarity that only the mountain air could bring. Knox rose early, as was his habit, and tended to the necessary chores before returning to the house. He found Tabitha already awake, dressed in a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, her hair arranged more softly than it had been the previous day. Good morning, she greeted him. I've made coffee and breakfast. I hope you don't mind. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of frying bacon and fresh coffee. Knox realized he hadn't smelled cooking in this house since his mother had been alive. Don't mind at all, he said, removing his hat. Smells good. They ate breakfast together, discussing the day ahead. Knox was surprised by how comfortable the silence between them could be, interrupted only by practical questions or observations. At precisely noon, Reverend Williams arrived, followed shortly by Thornton and his wife, Josephine. The ceremony was brief and to the point, conducted in front of the fireplace in the main room. Tabitha wore the same blue dress, adorned only with a small brooch at her throat. Knox had shaved and donned his best shirt, which still bore the crease marks from being folded in his trunk for too long. Do you, Knox Blackwell, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part. Knox looked at the woman before him, tall, proud, intelligent, and as uncertain in this moment as he was. I do. And do you, Tabitha Greene, Take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part." Tabitha's eyes met his, clear and determined. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Knox hesitated, suddenly aware that he had never kissed a woman with witnesses present. Tabitha solved his dilemma by leaning forward slightly, offering her cheek. Knox pressed his lips to her soft skin, inhaling the faint scent of lavender. After a simple meal and well wishes from their guests, Knox and Tabitha found themselves alone, husband and wife in name, strangers in reality. The awkwardness that had been kept at bay by the presence of others now filled the room. "I have something for you," Knox said abruptly, reaching into his pocket. "It's not much, but my mother always said a bride should have a gift on her wedding day." He held out a small wooden box. Tabitha took it, her fingers brushing against his, and opened it carefully. Inside lay a silver locket on a delicate chain. "It was my mother's," Knox explained. "My father gave it to her when they were married." Tabitha lifted the locket, opening it to find it empty. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you. I thought you might want to put something in it, a memento or such." She smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "I would like that very much." She handed him the necklace and turned, lifting her hair. "Would you?" Knox fumbled slightly with the clasp, acutely aware of the warmth of her skin beneath his calloused fingers. When she turned back, the locket rested against her throat, catching the afternoon light. "There's plenty of daylight left," he said, desperate to return to familiar territory. "I thought I might show you the north pasture. The view is worth the ride." Relief washed over Tabitha's face. "I would like that very much." They spent the afternoon riding the boundaries of the ranch, Knox pointing out landmarks and sharing his plans for expansion. Tabitha listened attentively, occasionally offering suggestions that demonstrated her quick mind and practical nature. As the sun began to set, they found themselves on a ridge overlooking the entire valley. The ranch looked small from this height, a pocket of civilization in the vast wilderness. "It's magnificent," Tabitha said, her face softened by the golden light. "I never imagined such openness could exist." "That's why I came west," Knox admitted. "Couldn't stand the feeling of being hemmed in." "Yes, I understand that entirely." She turned to him, her expression earnest. "I want you to know that I intend to be a good wife to you, Knox. I may not be what you expected, but I will work hard and do my best by you and this land." Knox nodded, unexpected emotion tightening his throat. "I believe you will, Tabitha, and I'll do right by you. I'm not much for fancy words or gentle ways, but I keep my promises." The ride back was quiet, both lost in thoughts of the night ahead. The reality of their marriage, all aspects of it, loomed before them as they returned to the house. Supper was a simple affair, neither eating much. When the dishes were cleaned and put away, they stood awkwardly in the main room, the bedroom door a silent presence neither seemed willing to acknowledge. "I'll bank the fire," Knox said finally. "And I'll prepare for bed," Tabitha replied, her voice steady despite the flush rising in her cheeks. When Knox entered the bedroom some minutes later, Tabitha was already beneath the covers, her hair loose around her shoulders. The lamp burned low, casting soft shadows across the room. Knox removed his boots and shirt, acutely aware of her presence but trying to afford her some modesty by keeping his back turned. "Knox," her voice was soft in the dimness. "I know this is unconventional, but I hope we might find comfort in each other in time." He turned to find her watching him, vulnerability and determination warring in her expression. "I hope that too," he said gruffly. When he slid beneath the covers beside her, she reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it bridged the vast distance between them more effectively than words could have done. The first weeks of their marriage settled into a routine of sorts. They worked from dawn until dusk, learning to move around each other with increasing familiarity. Tabitha proved herself capable and hardworking, tackling the neglected interior of the house with the same determination Knox showed in his outdoor labors. She surprised him with her willingness to learn ranching skills. She could milk a cow, gather eggs from the newly acquired chickens, and even help with the cattle when necessary. In turn, Knox found himself drawn to the evening hours when they would sit by the fire. Tabitha reading aloud from one of the books she had brought from Boston while he whittled or mended tack. Their physical relationship developed slowly, awkwardness giving way to a tentative exploration of each other. Knox was careful with her, mindful of her inexperience, and Tabitha approached this aspect of marriage with the same forthright curiosity she showed in all things. By the time the first snow fell in late November, they had found a measure of comfort in each other's arms that neither had anticipated. It was during the first major snowstorm that Knox truly began to appreciate his wife's resilience. The blizzard howled around the cabin for 3 days, trapping them inside. While many women might have complained or grown fearful, Tabitha seemed to embrace the enforced intimacy, using the time to teach Knox to play chess and to learn from him how to properly clean and load a rifle. "A woman should know how to defend herself," he explained as he showed her how to sight along the barrel. "I agree entirely," she replied, surprising him yet again. "My father thought it scandalous when I expressed interest in learning to shoot. He said no gentleman would want a wife who could handle firearms." Knox snorted. "Your father never lived in the West." Tabitha's smile was wry. "No, and he would be horrified to see me now, I imagine. Living in a cabin, wearing trousers to help with the cattle, married to a man he would consider entirely unsuitable." "And are you horrified?" Knox asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. She lowered the rifle, considering him thoughtfully. "No," she said finally. "I am more myself here than I ever was in Boston. There's an honesty to this life that I find refreshing." As winter deepened, their days fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings were for chores, feeding livestock, breaking ice on the water troughs, keeping paths clear of snow. Afternoons were for indoor work, mending, planning for spring, preserving what food they had. Evenings were for conversation and companionship. It was during one such evening, with snow falling gently outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, that Tabitha broached a subject they had both avoided. "I've noticed you never speak of how you got your scars," she said quietly, her fingers tracing the pattern of burn marks on his left arm. Knox stiffened slightly. Most people knew better than to ask, but Tabitha had never been one to shy away from difficult topics. "Don't much like talking about it," he said gruffly. "I understand," she replied, withdrawing her hand. "I didn't mean to pry." Knox caught her fingers before she could pull away completely. "No, it's all right. You're my wife. You should know." He took a deep breath. "It was during the war. I was with the 3rd Colorado Cavalry. We were scouting near Sand Creek when our camp was attacked in the night. My tent caught fire with me inside it, got out but not before the damage was done." Tabitha's eyes widened. "The Sand Creek massacre, you were there?" Knox's jaw tightened. "I was. Not something I'm proud of." Our commanding officer, he gave orders no decent man should follow. Some did anyway. "And you?" "I was injured early, spent most of it delirious with pain. By the time I was conscious again, it was over." He stared into the fire. "Took me years to piece together what really happened. The newspapers called it a great victory. It wasn't, it was a slaughter." Tabitha was silent for a long moment. "Is that why you came here, to get away from the memories?" Knox nodded slowly. "Partly. Needed to find a place where I could build something good, something clean." She laid her head against his shoulder, her warmth seeping through his shirt. "Thank you for telling me." That night, their lovemaking had a new dimension, a tenderness born of shared vulnerability. For the first time, Knox felt truly connected to his wife, not just physically but emotionally as well. As they lay together afterwards, Tabitha's head resting on his chest, he realized with startling clarity that he was beginning to care for this woman in ways he had never anticipated. Winter eventually released its grip on the land, and spring arrived with a burst of activity. There were fences to mend, fields to plow, calves to deliver. Tabitha threw herself into the work with enthusiasm, her fair skin tanning in the strengthening sun. It was during calving season that Knox truly came to appreciate her strength. She stayed up nights with him, helping to deliver breech calves, her slender arms stronger than they looked as she pulled alongside him. She didn't flinch from the blood or the muck, and when a particularly difficult birth resulted in a motherless calf, it was Tabitha who insisted on bottle feeding the creature every few hours. "We're not losing this one," she declared, cradling the spindly animal in the barn. "He's a fighter." Knox watched as she coaxed the reluctant calf to take the bottle, her patience seemingly endless. "You've got away with the beasts," he observed. She looked up, a smudge of dirt across her cheek and straw in her hair, and smiled. "They respond to kindness and persistence. Not unlike people I've found." As spring turned to summer, Tabitha's influence on the ranch became increasingly evident. The vegetable garden flourished under her care, providing fresh produce for their table. She had planted flowers near the front porch, adding unexpected splashes of color to the rugged landscape. Inside, the house had been transformed from a Spartan bachelor's quarters to a comfortable home, with curtains at the windows and rag rugs on the floors. More surprising to Knox was the way she had integrated herself into the community. Despite initial wariness from the townspeople, Tabitha had gradually won them over with her genuine interest in their lives and her willingness to help where needed. She volunteered at the small school, teaching reading and mathematics 2 afternoons a week. She joined the ladies' quilting circle, though her stitches were admittedly uneven. She even befriended Martha Simmons, the doctor's wife, who had initially been her harshest critic. "They've stopped calling you that peculiar Boston woman," Knox told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Now you're just Knox Blackwell's wife." Tabitha laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet valley. "I suppose that's progress, though I'd prefer to have my own identity." "You do," Knox assured her. "Believe me, no one who's met you thinks of you as just an extension of me." She studied him in the fading light. "Are you disappointed by that? Some men prefer a more conventional wife." Knox considered the question seriously. "When I sent for a bride, I thought I needed someone to cook my meals and warm my bed. I didn't realize what I really needed was a partner." He reached for her hand. "You're more than I deserve, Tabitha." Her fingers tightened around his. "I think we've both gotten more than we expected from this arrangement." The truth of her words struck him forcefully. Somewhere along the line, their marriage of convenience had become something else entirely. Knox wasn't sure when it had happened, perhaps during the long winter nights when they had shared stories of their childhoods, or during calving season when they had worked side by side in the mud and the blood, or perhaps it was happening right now as they sat together watching the day end, comfortable in each other's presence. Summer brought its own challenges. Drought threatened the pastures, and a mountain lion began picking off calves from the herd. Knox spent long days tracking the predator, returning home exhausted and frustrated. "Let me come with you tomorrow," Tabitha suggested after a particularly unproductive day. "An extra pair of eyes might help," Knox frowned. "It's dangerous, Tabitha. That cat's killed 3 calves already. I don't want you anywhere near it." "I can handle a rifle as well as most men in this county, thanks to your teaching," she countered. "And I'm observant. You said yourself that tracking isn't your strongest skill." "It's not about your abilities," Knox argued. "If anything happened to you, nothing will happen," she interrupted gently. "We'll be careful, together." In the end, he relented, unable to deny the logic of her argument. They set out at dawn, following the winding creek where the lion had last been seen. Tabitha rode slightly behind Knox, her rifle across her saddle, eyes scanning the landscape. It was Tabitha who spotted the track's fresh paw prints in the soft mud near a bend in the creek. They dismounted, tethering the horses to a sturdy pine, and proceeded on foot. Knox led the way, moving quietly through the underbrush, Tabitha close behind. They tracked the mountain lion for nearly 2 hours, the signs growing fresher as they went. At a small clearing, Knox held up his hand, signaling Tabitha to stop. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, was a flash of tawny fur. Knox raised his rifle, sighting along the barrel. The lion moved, presenting a clear shot. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle misfired with a dull click. The sound alerted the mountain lion, which turned toward them, its yellow eyes fixing on the humans. Knox frantically worked to clear the jam in his rifle, but the animal was already crouching, preparing to spring. Tabitha's rifle cracked beside him, the sound deafening in the small clearing. The lion jerked, then collapsed, a perfect shot through the chest. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Knox turned to his wife, who stood with the rifle still raised, a look of shock on her face. "You saved my life," he said simply. Tabitha lowered the rifle slowly. "I've never killed anything larger than a rabbit before." Knox moved to the fallen predator, confirming it was dead. It was a clean shot, quick death. He looked back at her. Thank you, she nodded, still processing what had happened. We should take it back to the ranch. The pelt will make a fine rug. Knox couldn't help but laugh at her practicality. Yes, madam, it certainly will. The incident with the mountain lion seemed to mark a turning point in their relationship. Knox found himself looking at Tabitha with new eyes, not just as a capable partner, but as a woman of remarkable courage and composure. For her part, Tabitha appeared to stand taller, more confident in her place on the ranch and in their marriage. The summer progressed, bringing with it the hard work of haying and preparations for the fall cattle drive. Knox hired 2 additional hands to help with the increased workload, and Tabitha took on the task of feeding the small crew. The men, initially skeptical of the tall, educated woman who spoke her mind freely, soon came to respect her work ethic and her excellent cooking. Your wife's different than most, Blackwell, commented Jim Porter, one of the hired hands as they repaired fencing one afternoon. My missus would faint dead away if I asked her to help birth a calf or shoot a mountain lion. Knox smiled slightly. Tabitha's not like most women. No, she surely isn't, Porter agreed. You're a lucky man. My brother sent for a bride last year. Got a city girl from Chicago who cried for 3 months straight before running back east. Tabitha had her challenges adjusting, Knox admitted, but she never complained, not once. It was true, he realized. Despite the harshness of ranch life, the isolation, the physical demands, Tabitha had approached each obstacle with determination and even enthusiasm. She had transformed not just the ranch, but Knox himself, softening his rough edges without diminishing his strength. As summer faded into autumn, Knox began to notice subtle changes in his wife. She tired more easily, sometimes napping in the afternoons. Certain foods that she had previously enjoyed now turned her stomach, and there was a new fullness to her figure, particularly around her usually slender waist. Knox suspected the cause but waited for Tabitha to speak of it. She did so one evening in late September as they sat by the fire after supper. I believe I'm with child, she said quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Though he had been expecting it, the confirmation sent a wave of emotion through Knox. Are you certain? She nodded. As certain as one can be without a doctor's confirmation. The baby should arrive in early spring by my calculations. Knox moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. How do you feel about it? Tabitha's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Happy, frightened, both at once, and you? Proud, he said immediately, proud and grateful. He placed a hand gently on her stomach, still flat beneath her dress. A child, our child. She covered his hand with hers. I never thought I would have this. A home, a husband, a child on the way. In Boston, I had resigned myself to spinsterhood and teaching other people's children. And now I can't imagine any life but this one. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. I love you, Knox Blackwell. I don't know when it happened, but I do. The words, so simple and yet so profound, struck Knox like a physical blow. He had known for some time that his feelings for Tabitha had deepened beyond respect and physical attraction, but he had not allowed himself to name those feelings. I love you too, he said, the words rough with emotion. Have for a while now, I reckon. Their kiss was tender, a seal on declarations too long unspoken. The news of Tabitha's pregnancy spread quickly through the small community. Gifts began arriving at the ranch, a handmade quilt from the ladies' circle, a carved wooden cradle from Thornton, preserved fruits and vegetables for the winter ahead. Knox watched with amazement as the people of Timber Creek, who had once whispered about his peculiar mail-order bride, now embraced her as one of their own. As Tabitha's condition became more evident, Knox found himself growing increasingly protective. He insisted she rest more, took on additional chores himself, and even hired a local girl to help with the housework. Tabitha accepted these changes with good grace, though she drew the line at being completely idle. I'm having a baby, not suffering from some debilitating illness, she informed him when he suggested she might give up her teaching duties at the school. Women have been working while carrying children since the beginning of time. Not all women are carrying my child, Knox retorted, then softened his tone at her raised eyebrow. I just worry about you, that's all. Tabitha's expression gentled. I know you do, and I promise to be careful, but I need to keep busy, Knox. It's who I am. They compromised. Tabitha continued teaching, but agreed to ride to town in the wagon rather than on horseback. She delegated the heavier household chores, but insisted on maintaining the garden and caring for her beloved chickens. And each evening she sat by the fire with Knox, planning for their future, with a child to raise and a ranch to build. Winter descended early that year, with the first heavy snow falling before Thanksgiving. Knox worked tirelessly to ensure the ranch was prepared, the barn well stocked with hay, the woodpile high, the root cellar full of preserved vegetables from Tabitha's garden. The mountain lion pelt, carefully tanned and prepared, now lay before the hearth, a daily reminder of Tabitha's courage. Christmas brought a rare gathering at the Blackwell Ranch. Thornton and Josephine came, as did the Reverend Williams and Dr. Simmons with his wife. Tabitha, now visibly pregnant, had decorated the cabin with pine boughs and red ribbons. She had baked for days beforehand pies and cookies, and a special Christmas pudding from an old family recipe. As Knox watched her move among their guests, her face glowing with happiness and health, he was struck by how completely she had transformed his life. A year ago, he had been a solitary man with little more than his work to sustain him. Now he had a home filled with warmth and laughter, a wife he adored, and a child on the way. After the guests had departed and they were preparing for bed, Knox presented Tabitha with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Merry Christmas," he said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's not much." Tabitha unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a small leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "I thought you might want to write about the baby," Knox explained. "Keep a record of things as he or she grows." Tabitha ran her fingers over the soft leather. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." She reached into the drawer of her bedside table and produced a package of her own. "This is for you." Inside was a new hat, finer than any Knox had ever owned, with his initials discreetly stitched inside the band. "How did you manage this?" he asked, turning the hat in his hands. "I had some help from Josephine," Tabitha admitted. "Do you like it?" "It's the finest gift I've ever received," he said honestly. They fell asleep that night in each other's arms, the future stretching before them like the vast Colorado sky full of promise and possibility. The winter passed slowly, days blending into weeks as the snow piled high around the ranch. Tabitha's pregnancy progressed normally, her body adapting to the changes with the same resilience she showed in all things. By February, she was spending most of her time indoors, her movements slowed by the weight of the child she carried. "Do you hope for a boy or a girl?" she asked Knox one evening as they sat by the fire, her feet propped on a stool he had made specifically for her comfort. Knox considered the question. "Healthy is all that matters to me, though I suppose a son would be helpful on the ranch one day." Tabitha smiled. "A daughter could be just as helpful. Look at me." "True enough," Knox chuckled. "Any child of yours is likely to be capable regardless of whether it's a boy or girl." "Any child of ours," she corrected gently. Knox placed his hand on her rounded belly, feeling the baby kick against his palm. "Any child of ours," he agreed. The baby arrived on a clear, cold day in early March. Tabitha's labor began before dawn, and Knox rode frantically to town to fetch Dr. Simmons. By the time they returned, Tabitha was well into active labor, her face flushed with exertion but calm. "You're doing fine, Mrs. Blackwell," Dr. Simmons assured her after examining her. "The baby is in the correct position. Everything appears normal." Knox hovered nearby, feeling helpless as his wife labored to bring their child into the world. Tabitha, despite her pain, seemed determined to reassure him. "I'm all right," she told him between contractions. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time, remember?" The labor lasted well into the afternoon. Knox paced, prayed, and occasionally held Tabitha's hand when she asked for him. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, Dr. Simmons announced that it was time to push. Tabitha bore down with all her strength, her face contorted with effort. Knox stood beside her, supporting her shoulders, whispering encouragement. With a final, tremendous push, their child entered the world, announcing its arrival with a lusty cry. "You have a daughter," Dr. Simmons declared, placing the squalling infant on Tabitha's chest. Knox stared in wonder at the tiny, red-faced creature nestled against his wife. "A daughter." His daughter. The emotion that welled up inside him was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a fierce, protective love that threatened to overwhelm him. Tabitha looked up at him, exhausted but radiant. "She's perfect," she whispered. "Yes," Knox agreed, his voice thick. "Perfect like her mother." They named her Margaret Catherine Blackwell after both their mothers. Knox, who had never considered himself a sentimental man, found himself utterly captivated by his infant daughter. Her tiny fingers, her delicate features, the way she seemed to study him with her unfocused blue eyes, everything about her was miraculous to him. Tabitha recovered quickly from the birth, her natural resilience serving her well. Within a week, she was up and about, caring for the baby with the same efficiency she brought to all tasks. Knox marveled at her ability to nurse the infant, manage the household, and still find time to discuss ranch business with him. "You're remarkable," he told her one evening as she rocked Margaret to sleep. "Most women would still be confined to bed." Tabitha smiled tiredly. "I'm fortunate to have a strong constitution and a husband who helps more than most." It was true that Knox had taken on many additional responsibilities since the baby's arrival. He had learned to change diapers, to heat water for the baby's bath, and to walk the floor with his daughter when she was fussy. The hired hands were amused by the sight of the tough rancher with a tiny infant cradled against his chest, but Knox didn't care. These moments with his daughter were precious beyond measure. Spring arrived in a burst of green, transforming the valley into a lush paradise. Tabitha began taking Margaret outside for short periods, showing her the flowers, the chickens, the new calves in the field. Knox often found them in the garden, Tabitha working with one hand while keeping the other on the basket where Margaret slept. "She should know the land," Tabitha explained when Knox questioned whether the baby was too young for such outings. "This is her inheritance, after all." The thought stirred something deep in Knox's chest. His daughter would grow up here, on this land that he and Tabitha had worked so hard to cultivate. She would learn to ride, to garden, to appreciate the beauty and the harshness of the Colorado wilderness. And she would have what Knox himself had lost too early, a family that loved her, a place where she belonged. As summer approached, Knox began preparations for the annual cattle drive to Denver. It would be his first extended absence since Margaret's birth, and the thought of leaving his wife and daughter, even temporarily, filled him with unease. "We'll be fine," Tabitha assured him as he fretted over last-minute instructions. "The ranch won't fall apart in the 2 weeks you're gone." "I know that," Knox said, watching as she nursed their daughter. "It's just, I'll miss you both." Tabitha's expression softened. "And we'll miss you. But this drive is important for the ranch's finances. We need the money if we're going to expand as we've discussed." Knox nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. They had been planning to purchase the adjacent property, which would allow them to increase their herd substantially. It was a sound business decision, but it required capital that only a successful drive could provide. The morning of his departure, Knox stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Tabitha and Margaret sleep. His daughter's tiny form was curled against her mother's side, both of them peaceful in the early dawn light. The sight burned itself into his memory, something to carry with him on the long journey ahead. He bent to kiss Tabitha's forehead, and her eyes fluttered open. "It's time," she murmured. "Yes," he whispered. "I'll be back as soon as I can." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Be careful, come back to us." "Always," he promised. The cattle drive was successful beyond Knox's expectations. The price per head was higher than anticipated, and the journey itself was relatively uneventful. No major storms, no cattle rustlers, no serious injuries among the men. Knox concluded his business in Denver as quickly as possible, eager to return home to his family. The ranch came into view on a perfect summer afternoon, the cabin nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. Knox urged his horse faster, anticipation building in his chest. As he approached, he saw Tabitha emerge from the house, Margaret in her arms. They stood on the porch, waiting for him, and the sight nearly unmanned him with its simple perfection. He dismounted in a fluid motion and strode toward them, taking the last few steps at a near run. Tabitha met him halfway, her free arm going around his neck as he embraced both her and their daughter. "Welcome home," she said against his neck. Knox breathed in the scent of her lavender and sunshine and home. Missed you something fierce, he admitted. Margaret, now 3 months old, studied him with solemn eyes before breaking into a toothless smile that pierced him to the core. She remembers you, Tabitha said softly. Later, after Knox had bathed away the dust of the trail and they had shared a celebratory supper, he presented Tabitha with his purchases from Denver, a new dress of deep blue silk, a silver rattle for Margaret, and papers confirming that the adjacent property was now theirs. You bought it already. Tabitha exclaimed, examining the deed. I thought we were going to discuss it further. The price was right, Knox explained, and I didn't want to risk losing it to another buyer. Are you pleased? Tabitha's smile was answer enough. It's perfect. Now we can expand the herd next spring, just as we planned. That night, with Margaret sleeping peacefully in her cradle and the windows open to admit the summer breeze, Knox and Tabitha rekindled the physical aspect of their marriage that had been necessarily suspended during the late stages of pregnancy and early weeks of motherhood. Their reunion was tender and passionate, both of them eager to express the love that had grown stronger despite their separation. Afterwards, as they lay together in the darkness, Knox reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a mail-order arrangement born of mutual desperation to a partnership founded on respect, admiration, and deep love, it seemed almost miraculous. What are you thinking about? Tabitha asked, her head resting on his chest. About how lucky I am, Knox replied honestly. About how different my life is now compared to a year ago. Tabitha propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the moonlight that filtered through the window. Do you ever regret it, sending for a bride sight unseen? Knox tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. Not for a single moment, though I still wonder sometimes why those other men turned you down. Tabitha laughed softly. I told you I was too tall, too educated, too opinionated. One potential husband wrote that he could tell from my photograph that I would be difficult to manage. His loss, Knox said, pulling her closer. My gain. It worked out exactly as it was meant to, Tabitha murmured, settling against him once more. This is where I belong, with you and Margaret on this land. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Blackwell family. The ranch prospered under their joint management, the herd growing steadily larger, the buildings improving with each passing season. Margaret grew from an infant to a toddler to a little girl who adored her father and inherited her mother's intelligence and independence. When Margaret was 3, Tabitha gave birth to a son, whom they named James Thornton Blackwell. Unlike his sister's relatively easy delivery, James's birth was difficult and dangerous. For hours, Knox feared he might lose both his wife and his son. The memory of that fear bone deep and paralyzing stayed with him long after Tabitha had recovered, and James had proven himself to be a healthy, robust baby. By the time James was 2 and Margaret 6, the Blackwell Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the county. Knox and Tabitha had hired several permanent hands, built a new, larger house, and established themselves as respected members of the community. Tabitha had started a small school on the ranch for Margaret, James, and the children of their workers, putting her education to use in a way that brought her great satisfaction. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Knox surprised Tabitha with a trip to Denver, their first real vacation since their marriage. They left the children in the capable hands of Josephine, who had become like a grandmother to them, and spent a week enjoying the luxuries of city life. On their last evening in Denver, they attended the theater, Tabitha resplendent in a new gown of emerald silk that complemented her auburn hair, now streaked with a few strands of silver. Knox, wearing a suit that still felt uncomfortable despite his years of increased prosperity, couldn't take his eyes off her. You're staring, she remarked as they took their seats for the performance. Can't help it, he replied honestly. You're the most beautiful woman in the room. Tabitha laughed, the sound as delightful to him now as it had been when he first heard it. You're biased. Doesn't make it any less true. He took her hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band he had placed there a decade ago. Happy anniversary, Mrs. Blackwell. Her eyes, still as blue and clear as they had been the day she stepped off the train, softened with emotion. Happy anniversary, my love. Later, in the privacy of their hotel room, Knox presented her with his gift, a new locket to replace the one he had given her on their wedding day. This one was gold rather than silver, with small diamonds set into the design. "Open it," he urged. Inside, he had placed a tiny photograph of Margaret and James on one side, and on the other, a lock of his own hair. "So you'll always have the three of us close to your heart," he explained. Tabitha's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect," she whispered. "My family. My heart." She presented him with her own gift, a new saddle, meticulously crafted to his specifications, with his initials worked into the leather. It was a practical gift, typical of Tabitha's thoughtfulness, and Knox appreciated it all the more for that. As they prepared for bed, Knox found himself reflecting on the decade they had shared. "Did you ever imagine, when you agreed to marry a stranger in the Colorado Territory, that this is where you would end up?" he asked. Tabitha considered the question seriously, as was her way. "No," she admitted. "I hoped for security, perhaps companionship. I never dared hope for love, for children, for the life we've built together." She moved into his arms, as natural as breathing. "And you, did you imagine this when you sent for a mail-order bride that no one else wanted?" Knox tightened his arms around her, marveling as always at how perfectly they fit together despite their different heights and builds. "I thought I was getting a housekeeper who would share my bed," he said honestly. "Instead, I got a partner who shares my life. Who makes every day better just by being in it." Tabitha tilted her face up to his. "I love you, Knox Blackwell, more today than yesterday and not as much as tomorrow. And I love you, Tabitha Blackwell, always have, always will." Their kiss sealed the promise, as it had countless times before. Outside, the lights of Denver twinkled like stars, but Knox knew that the real treasure awaited them at home, the ranch they had built together, the children they had raised with love, the life they had forged from an arrangement that had blossomed into something neither of them could have imagined. The peculiar mail-order bride that no one else had wanted had indeed tamed his roughest roads, not by changing him, but by walking beside him, sharing the journey in all its challenges and triumphs. Together, they had created a legacy of love that would endure long after them, as enduring as the land they had nurtured and the family they had raised. As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, secure in their love and their shared future, Knox knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man in the Colorado Territory, perhaps in all the West. What had begun as a practical solution to loneliness had become the greatest blessing of his life. And tomorrow they would go home, to the land and the life they loved, to continue writing their story together.